Hi, this is Aubrey Martin from Martin Family Real Estate, and welcome to the second part in our educational series. Today, we welcome JC Rogauskas from American Pacific Mortgage. We call him our mortgage gladiator, and I've worked on several files with JC over the years. He is going to be talking to us a little bit about investments in real estate, both his experience as an investor, as well as what his experience has been for other clients on the real estate side. So JC, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi there, Aubrey. Thanks for having me.
So I'd love to get started and find out a little bit about what happened that made you decide to get your first investment. What did that look like, and sort of where are you today?
Yeah, for sure. So I have been in love with real estate since I was a very little kid. I don't know how many people remember those little booklets, right, that you have in the little house-shaped plastic things outside of Denny's or whatever. Would always grab one of those, even when I was young kid, 6, 7, 8. And I remember making little 3x5 cards out of the little each individual listing, and no idea why. My family, no connection with real estate at all, but as soon as I could, I bought my first house in my 20s, 21, which was right at the height of the 2007 bubble.
Fun,
So
good
I've
timing.
lived through that, and I still have that property. It just didn't make sense to me that once I owned a property, when I was ready to move or move on, to sell it. I mean, I already had it, and it was poised to take care of itself. So I just started renting it out. And then when I bought the next house, all of a sudden I had 2 houses and I started investing. Um, yeah, so that made kind of a natural flow into how do we make this work. And now, none of my properties have ever necessarily brought in a whole lot more money. I'm lucky if they pay for themselves plus their upkeep. But the way that I have to kind of start out with all of my projects still is find something that needs some work, right? Something that is a little bit more affordable, and get into it as cheaply as I possibly can to try to scrape off some profit there. And I think there's a lot of people who want to do something like that too. Something who they're looking for a way to invest in real estate, but they don't necessarily have all the money in the world.
So what do you feel like is the advantage if you're not making a ton from the rental side of it? What do you feel like is the advantage of having the rentals? What does that long-term plan look like for you?
Well, I mean, I think that's definitely the idea, is that it's a long-term investment, right? So the thought is, as you're still living your life and working your job, that property is kind of taking care of itself. And if you're doing well and you have extra, maybe you only want 1 or 2 extra investments. Okay, so maybe you can throw extra money at those properties, get them paid off sooner, and then they cash flow faster, right? But the idea with like any investment, like we've been taught, for ages about investing in the real estate market or in our retirement accounts, is start early, because the earlier you start, the more that appreciation grows. And so looking at it like another form or another way to supplement your income in the future or supplement your retirement is a really great way to look at real estate investing. It doesn't have to be this fix and flip, grab an extra $30,000 and keep going, right? It doesn't have to be this big wheeling and dealing venture. It can be for literally everybody, to help establishing more wealth, or
Well,
to
and
help in
the adage
establishing
in
wealth.
real estate is that the only way to lose money in real estate is if you sell it. And so, in the end, that, right now, one of the things that you and I talk about a lot is that the appreciation in Portland Metro and in Salem Metro, and most certainly in Bend Metro, and even right now at the coast, our appreciation here typically is about double the national average, which is somewhere between 3 and 4% appreciation year over year. Portland Metro, because of just our employers and just the stability of our market, technically, our metro markets are around 6 to 7% appreciation year over year. This year, just because of the interest rates which have created an enormous demand with buyers, as well as we've been undersupplied now for over 13, 14 years at least. So you've got very, very low supply. Those have pushed an enormous amount of buyers onto the market. And appreciation right now, this just came out actually, 19% in Portland Metro from last year at this time to this year. Bend is 36% of appreciation. Now, of course, that's not going to be sustainable forever. Appreciation is not going to is that's not sustainable, and it will go down to what is kind of our normal rates at some point. But not anytime super soon, as long as you have that supply and demand issue. And it's definitely a really solid way to sort of invest your money. Can you speak to that as far as an investment in real estate as opposed to, say, retirement or what have you?
Yeah, absolutely. Couple really key points you brought up there. One, I want to kind of highlight first off about that 19% number. Really amazing number. But we should point out that there are also really good years in the stock market, right? So they have those similar things there. But the really neat thing about that 19%, right, is you said we're climbing at 3 to 4 national average. Our area maybe double that, which is great. But then we had this one big 19% jump year. And even if things do slow down, or when they do slow down, you just start climbing from there, right? Your new base level is now 19% higher. And so the fact that your $500,000 home, will say, almost jumped up almost $100,000 in 1 year, and that's now the new base. Your home is now $600,000 home, and whatever that national average going forward, or our local average going forward, is what we're climbing from there. That's just an incredible thought to have about how good of an investment is real estate.
Well, and by and large, they're appraising. I think that's the thing that people don't really understand is that, yes, and this is not just happening in Oregon. This is really nationally. This is happening everywhere in every market. Oregon, Portland actually is one of the least expensive metro markets on the West Coast. So if you can imagine what 19-20% looks like here, imagine what that looks like in Seattle or the Bay Area or San Diego, or like take your
Mm-hmm.
pick. But in general, we're all sort of going through all of these things. But that yes, as you said, even when they sort of stabilize, that they're praising for that. And so really they're just jumping off from an incredible year. And most likely, really, according to the National Association of Realtors and their economists and even the Federal Reserve, like, things are going to stay this way for quite a while.
For sure. For sure. So back to the point of comparing them really to the stock market, right? So I have this conversation even with first-time home buyers, but it's very, very important for first-time investors as well. Your stock market, which we all are fairly comfortable with, the idea of contributing to a 401k or a retirement plan. And as I mentioned before, the sooner the better, right? Because the more time that has to grow, the better. Historically, the national average for growth in the stock market has been 6 or 7%, right? We have our up years, we have our down years, we have our up times and down times. Long-term investment, retirement account thinking, 6 or 7%. Now, you can start one of those accounts, your 401k, with your employer with, $100 off your first paycheck, no problem. But you start talking about that kind of growth in a home, right? Whether it's your first home, your first investment, your seventh investment, there is going to be some initial contribution to that home, right? There are zero down programs, but generally you're going to have to pay some kind of closing costs or come to the table with some kind of money. However, well, let me back up a second. The national growth, as you mentioned, right, we'll underline, for housing is generally somewhere between 3 and 4. In our greater area, it's probably double that, right? So 7-8%. And as you mentioned, this last year has been 19, and I think the years before that were 10 or above as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, we still have this kind of growth curve. Now with housing, and what I love about real estate is that, yes, there is some expense to get in, but when you do, the appreciation of that asset is not on the amount of your down payment or the amount of your down payment and closing costs. It is the full value of that property. So even if you've got a 95, 97% loan on that property and you only own, you know, 3% of that actual property, you're getting the appreciation, the value, the return on investment on the entire amount. There is no other investment vehicle on earth that lets you contribute a tiny percentage and
Mhm.
yet still gain the appreciation and value on the whole thing. And so
So,
the power of that, one last thing, the power of that appreciation combining up and up. Because let's just highlight that 19% you mentioned, right? Because even if we stop after this year and that 19 is done and we go back to averages, you still grew that 19% on the full amount of that property. There's just nothing more powerful than that investment if you can think of it long term, right? There are dangers to fixing and flipping. But as I think you mentioned earlier, in real estate, the big thing is you're only seeing that loss if you sell at a loss.
right.
If you let it sit and it just keeps growing, it's going to pay off.
So my question is do you feel both from the lending standpoint, from the investor standpoint yourself, do you feel like that this is a good market for investors, being that the prices are what they are?
This is a tricky market for everyone, right? First time homebuyers struggle to get their offers accepted. First time homebuyers struggle to find something that they can get into. Investors are going to have a similar struggle. There is less on the market to choose from, and everything's going for a little bit higher. But as we mentioned, these prices are not predicted to go down. They're predicted to continue to go up. And so it's not necessarily that it's a good time for investors so much as it's not a good time to wait for
It's as good
anybody.
it's as good as it's gonna get.
And I will point out a couple of other things. Investing does require a little bit different approach than your first time home buyer would, or what we might call a primary residence, a home you're going to live in. It does require slightly more down payment, right? So you're going to have more cash available. But that in and of itself actually makes your offers stronger. So when you have more cash to approach this investment, you're fighting against these first time homeowners who, don't have to have that much and don't have that much. So your offer is going to look stronger. So in a tight market, investors, because more cash is required, are going to look better when competing.
And so we know what some of the like what first time home buyer programs look like, or we know about FHA and VA and conventional and jumbo and all the programs. How do these programs differ than what is available to investors? What can they take advantage of that is different from what's in the regular primary residence market?
So it is pretty cool. And being a broker and working with a brokerage bank, it's nice to be able to have a lot of options for people and a lot of different things to explore, because those products that you mentioned there for first time homebuyers, most of those programs also have investment style products. But on top of that, there are a lot of investment only type products. So oftentimes I like to specialize as the mortgage gladiator is finding solutions for people. So people who want something, let's put a plan in place, let's talk about it. But in general, what you're looking at for an investor, instead of some of the lower down payment programs that you have for first time home buyers, you're generally going to require a minimum of 20% down, maybe 20 to 25% or more, depending on your specific situation. And your interest rates are going to be a slight higher. So I generally estimate about 0.5% to 1% higher than what your normal primary residence first time homebuyer purchase rates would be.
So I love this idea that not only can you use a lot of the programs that are available to primary residence folks because they have their sort of subsections of programs, but then you also have other programs as well. Can you talk a little bit about what exists? For example, FHA, VA, do these programs have the ability to have an investment? And then what are some of the other programs that are available that are really specifically just for investors?
So VA is going to be a little bit tricky because their benefits really are to, house that veteran. So investments on their side aren't going to be very, they're not going to be options there. But FHA, though their focus very much is on first time investors and affordability for people in general, they will still allow you to consider 1 to 4 unit multifamily homes as a primary residence if you're living in one of those units. So one of the little loopholes that's really cool about FHA actually is that if you live in one of the units, you can still get away with 3.5% down, even on a fourplex.
Because it's
So
a
you can have
primary
three.
residence that happens to have, right, investment potential.
Yeah. So I mean that's a duplex, that's a triplex, that's a fourplex. So I mean, even if you've got a duplex and there's somebody else on the other side, I literally right now I'm sitting in the duplex that I bought
Mhm.
with 3.5% down, and the other tenants pay most of my mortgage because of it. So I mean that's a great way to use some of our more standard products to do that. There are conventional approaches to multifamily, but they're a lot stricter. It's more like 15% down. If you're that close, I almost recommend going 20% down anyway, or saving that money to invest somewhere else and just
Mhm.
using FHA. There's pluses and minuses. It's all about the conversation there. But there are also some very niche products that are actually really cool for investing. And something I've dug into quite a bit lately is hard money lending. So hard money is investor only. There is no residence, no living in these houses because it is meant to be an investment and it's treated as such. They don't want to have to evict you, kind of thing. And hard money in general is going to be a temporary source of funds that doesn't ask a lot of questions. A lot of benefits to it. They don't need an appraisal. Um, they can fund almost in within a week. Like you can be done in like a week. So when you're competing with these other offers and these other bids in a tight market, no appraisal is huge. Um, your inspections are still up to you, but at the same time, they're not requiring anything. They're expecting some of this work to be done and the ability to close whenever the seller wants. Because a
So
lot of
you,
times
oh, go ahead.
the sellers are sitting on mortgages themselves. And so if they have to pay another, couple $1,000s in their mortgage payment while you wait to close, that's like basically upping your offer a couple $1,000s.
Well, and you and I have worked on one of these together. And what was interesting to me was that it's looked at from the seller perspective as just cash. It's no different from a cash offer, no appraisal. In this case, a lender doesn't care like they would through a conventional or VA or FHA product where there is an appraisal. They don't care about health and safety stuff. They don't care about anything, right? This is really just but on the other hand too, right, it's only for investment purposes. What is the length of time generally that you need to repay that?
They're looking at 1 year, but they'll generally extend that, um, just because again they're looking at it like a business, right? And so what they're running into is, okay, does the plan you have for this make sense, and why did it take longer than we expected, kind of thing. I have personally had one extended, like basically doubled. I've held on to one for 2 years. I will tell you, it's expensive. That money, no questions asked, or very few questions asked, does not come cheaply. But when your home is, appreciating at 19%, just about any interest rate is worth it.
Right. Because you're still going to gain that. And it's just another tool in the toolbox. And one thing I've always appreciated about you is your ability to really think outside the box. You go to a bank, they offer their conventional product, they offer FHA and VA and USDA, which everybody else has. You have an entire arsenal of products. And I really have never worked with anybody else that has had the hard money lending option. And I think that that's the benefit really of brokers as well, is that if you have an excellent lender like JC, you've got this idea that there are so many possibilities, that it's not just in one little box, because investment is definitely different than your primary residence. I guess one question that I would have is that if you were talking to someone who was interested in investing, where do you think in our market would be the place to start for them? Is it a detached? Is it a condo? Is it a townhouse? Location wise, does it matter? Can you talk a little bit about how you sort of weigh what makes a good investment for you, and sort of what has been the result of those decisions along the way when you have invested yourself?
Well, I know you have these conversations with even your first time home buyers because I've heard them. But the way that you list out the value of different types of properties is the same with investing for mostly the same reason, but there are additional reasons on top of that for investing. So the way you list it out is multifamily, and correct me if I'm a little bit wrong, but
Mhm. Yes.
multifamily, single family, townhome, condo, manufactured home, trailer park,
Manufactured
things like that.
home, that's right, that's totally right, and then manufactured home that's on real property,
Yep,
and then, any sort of, mobile home that's in a park is sort of
in a
at the
park,
bottom, because that's personal property, and they really don't appreciate like
for
other
sure.
homes do.
The only extra one that we get to add for investing is commercial property, which is more than 4 units. So it could be your even small apartment complexes. Anything like 5, 6, 7 units that's over 4 units is technically a commercial property. And there are different types of loans for those commercial property loans. You have to look at them as a commercial business versus even the unique single family products or the unique 1 to 4 unit products that I have. I do also do commercial lending, so we can look at those and look at the different options. That's exciting. When it comes to the investing world, right, the reason or the little different tweaks of value to these ones, when you've got the commercial deals with multiple doors, the real thing comes down to, the saying is, the more doors the better, right? Oftentimes with these larger commercial units, you're like, how many doors is it? Because even with multifamily, a four unit, a 3 unit, a duplex, yes, I own one property, but it's 2 doors, it's 2 opportunities for income. So it's the same thing as it's a risk balance, I suppose. Yes, the larger the property, the more liability you have, the more debt you're probably holding to come up with that, the more there is to manage. And I highly recommend property management companies, because you should be focused on your job and your investing and let them take care of the maintenance piece of it.
What they do well versus what we do well.
Exactly. And so while we do have to balance, okay, let's say 17 doors does come with 17 or double that toilets and sinks, right?
Mhm.
It does also come with the absorption of liability, because if you lose one tenant, you're not missing your entire income stream. You're missing 1/17 of that income stream. And when you do need to remodel, you're not taking your entire property off of that rental flow, that cash flow to do those remodels. You're taking 1/17 of that off. And so the way the investor looks at it, though they still value it the same way, the look of it is more of a liability balance. And so there is some weighing that needs to happen when you start looking at a lot of doors, but in general, the more the merrier, because you're absorbing that liability and breaking it up into smaller, more manageable chunks. So that if something does go wrong, it goes wrong in a smaller percentage of your investment.
Well, and location wise, in my view, location is the same whether it's primary or investment. So the trifecta really is for how much you can charge in rent and how much you buy a house for, has to do with schools, proximity to services, and proximity to transportation or highways. So you can charge more rent in a place like Bethany because it is closer into things than you could possibly say in and maybe in Cornelius because it's further away from things, right? So
Sure.
is that, you feel like that that's true in investment too, that although maybe you can get a better deal in some places because of that location, but you also, on the other hand, can't charge as much rent? I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Very solid question. I'm going to put two little asterisks over here to the side, and we'll get back to these 2 points.
Noted.
Um, but I do want to agree with you in general about most of that. For the first part is like, if somebody wants to live there more, right? So like the Bethany area, we want to own a home there more, so the home prices are worth, or are higher. Then the same person who's going to rent is going to want to live there more too, and so those rent values are going to be higher. So yeah, in general, as a baseline, that makes sense. Now the two little asterisks. First one is, and I'm really loving this in Oregon because of what our landlord tenant laws are becoming until they finally figure that out a little bit better, um, is nightly rentals, right? So yes, Bethany is a great place to live and rent and work.
Hmm.
However, Mount Hood and the coast are great places to own nightly rentals because those people living in Bethany want to get the heck out of there on the weekends and get to the mountain or to the ocean.
Hmm.
And so those can be very, very profitable investments and much safer investments in some ways because of Oregon landlord tenant laws. So that's one little asterisk. If you're looking for short-term rentals, or if you're looking at investment properties, short-term rentals is something to consider as well. Second little asterisk, is I don't, you mentioned Cornelius, right? Because it's a little bit farther out than say the Bethany area. And and I do fully agree that Bethany is a higher value area and will pull higher value rents. I love the Cornelius area,
I
especially
do
right
too.
now
Hmm.
for investing.
Yeah, because it's right
And
on that because it has not even close to hit the potential that it will, and it's still affordable, and there's tons of new construction there, and there's lots and lots of development. So Bethany is really has been around, in West Side terms for quite a while. It was started to be built around 2000 or so, late 90s, but Cornelius has really started to come up in the last few years. And where else we've seen this enormous growth, if you were lucky enough to get in there, is Forest Grove. Forest
yes,
Grove was a place where, again, it was a little further out, it was less expensive. But as the prices have increased closer into the city, people have moved further and further out, not just because of the prices, but frankly, because of this COVID migration. People want space, they want a yard. If things shut down, they want someplace to go. And where that is offered is places like Forest Grove and Banks and Cornelius, and places that are North Plains. These places have absolutely jumped in all of the development. And so if you can be lucky enough to get in, not at the ground floor anymore because those days are gone, but maybe like the mid-level floor,
right?
then it's a much better because Bethany is really already so expensive. And so if you
Yeah.
can find an opportunity to get it in sort of that up and coming area, that's really the best. It's always the best investment.
For the first time investor, who I feel like we've been speaking to mostly,
Yes.
I love the idea of Cornelius because you're not having to because you have to come up with more money to invest, right? You have to have more down. You have to expect more expenses. Um, Oftentimes, investing in Bethany isn't an option. And so the idea that, okay, well, I don't want to fault Cornelius because, as we said, it's a great investment.
It
It
is.
may be a better investment growth wise than Bethany, even though Bethany is a stable, more valuable location.
Much
The
more room for appreciation in Cornelius, though, over
Exactly.
time.
So you can get into something, an
Mhm.
investor, a first time investor, or even, a second or third time investor who is still struggling, just to keep clawing up. Cornelius is, and places like it are still such a great opportunity because the ability to get in is better, and you're not necessarily overreaching as much as you would trying to buy a slightly more expensive home.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So my final question for you is that where do you currently hold investment properties, and what is next on your agenda?
So COVID put me into an interesting situation where I actually ended up selling a couple places, and while it's never been my intent to sell, um, I did want to get into some fixing and flipping, which is we worked together on my first one that I intended to fix and flip.
Yeah.
Um, so I did get rid of one property other than that fix and flip through COVID. So I was in Southern Oregon, but I'm now out of Southern Oregon as well. I'm in Portland proper, here in Hillsboro. I have one at the coast as well. I've been looking very heavily into something in Mount Hood because I
By
do
the way,
like.
the Mount Hood area, for those of you who are interested, is the least expensive resort area in the country. So it's expensive. I sell over in Govey and Rhodey and all of that. But it's still very affordable if you can find something good. It's definitely affordable if you're willing to do as JC was talking about, doing that the Airbnb type model.
The nightly rental is a great way to combine a second home vacation property that you and your family can enjoy, as well as an investment opportunity that at least helps pay for itself, if not pays for itself completely once you have that initial down payment invested. And the neat idea about second homes is it's kind of a comfortable in the middle between how much you have to put down compared to primary residence and investment properties. So oftentimes with second homes, you can put only 10% down versus the 20 or 15 that you'd have to go into an investment. So it's a way to get into a second home,
As a
that
primary residence,
could
right? Right.
theoretically
Right.
become an investment property down the road, instead of coming up with a whole lot of money. So that's another way to get into something unique like that.
Well, I look forward to seeing what your mountain adventure will look like. I think it is the next natural place for you. When you mentioned mountain before, I sort of, it had occurred to me because you already have that beach property that is now up
We got
and
something in
running.
the
And
beach for the summer. We
yep,
just need something to go play in the snow, and that's
absolutely.
gonna be
Well,
Mount Hood.
luckily, Oregon is one of the most beautiful places, and it has everything very in very short distance, right? Always close to the mountain, close to the ocean, not too far
Two
to the
hours either
panhandle.
way.
Yeah, it's pretty great. JC, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I appreciate it. I know the viewers do as well. And if you would like to reach out to JC, what is the best way to reach you?
My cell phone is always on, 360-607-3017. Been my phone for many years since I was in Washington, Southern Washington. But feel free to call, text, and you can always email too, jc.rogauskas@apmortgage.com.
Thank you so much again. Have a great rest of your day. And please feel free to reach out to JC if you have any further questions. Have a
Thank you,
great
Aubrey.
day, everyone. Thank you.